You're listening to the Full Court Press with your host, Drew Duncan. Don't you dare touch that dial. Football season is upon us, ladies and gentlemen. It is here. It's official with the Hall of Fame game. It's official with the NFL inductee. But even then, it's still preseason, right? It's preseason football. Sometimes it's about as good as watching Pee Wee football. Keeping it real. But you know what, though? I don't mind preseason. I don't mind preseason for a lot of reasons. Number one, I think you need time to be able to figure out who your guys are. And obviously, number two, you're trying to work out kinks and snaps and try and get timing down and things like that. But more than anything, obviously, we're giving our draft pick guys an opportunity to prove themselves that they belong in the NFL. So I don't mind preseason football at all. What I do mind is preseason top 25 polls and preseason power football index rankings, power rankings in the NFL. You know, and the thing is every Monday, right? I do a little segment. It's called Say What. And I was going to talk about Jay Cutler getting signed to the Miami Dolphins. And I thought, man, I could go with that and a couple of other different things. But ultimately, I just wanted to say I can't stand top 25 preseason polls and NFL power index rankings.
Say what?
Look, let me be clear. It is fun, okay? It's very fun to open up a magazine or an article or whatever, get on ESPN, whatever your source of information is, CBS Sports, whatever the case may be, and look at it and go, hey, you know, I'm an Oklahoma fan and we're ranked here this year. But to me, that's the problem. Every single season, you're likely to predict exactly who's going to be somewhere in the top 25. You're going to see an Oklahoma. You're going to see a Florida, probably Michigan, Nebraska for the longest time. You're probably going to see Miami this year, I would venture to guess. You're going to see Ohio State. I'm guessing you're going to see the defending champion Clemson Tigers. You're going to see a lot of these same teams. You're going to see the Alabama Crimson Tide. And don't get me wrong, you know, Alabama and Nick Saban and what they've done over there, yeah, they've got the right that if we're going to continue to do this, to be in a preseason top 25. Every year under Nick Saban, they are expected to compete for a national title. But folks, it's called Clemsoning for a reason. Up until the last couple of seasons, Clemson would be undefeated, they're a preseason top 25 team, and then they would tank against some of the more elite teams within their conference, i.e. Florida State. Sometimes they drop a ball against like a North Carolina State or somebody to that effect. And they just, you know, they blow it all. You know, the very real reality of it is, I don't think that we should have polls come out until after the fourth week in the season. Especially now with the college football playoff. And I understand that there are a lot of people out there who don't think that they should even have rankings now until week 8 in the season, simply because that's when they choose to drop the the college football playoff rankings. And, you know, part of me can concede to that, but I think that is a little bit too far out. You know, here's the issue that I see with a preseason top 25. You know, again, it's great for fans. It's great for alumnus to look at and go, hey, you know what? This is my team. This is where they are. We're looking good this year. The problem that I see is you look at a team like Oklahoma last year, who was ranked very high to start the season, and they dropped the game to Houston and then a horrendous loss to the Ohio State Buckeyes. After that, within the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, you knew right away that their chance pretty much at a college football playoff had dissolved immediately. You take a look at the BCS era, you go back even further, there was only one instance, where two teams started out ranked in the top 5 and ended up finishing in the BCS championship game. That was the year Texas played USC. That's it. Think about Auburn going from unranked to playing in a BCS national title game when Cam Newton was there. You know, Notre Dame is another team that sneaks in every single season. And how good have they really been in recent years? I understand that longevity and fanfare and alumni and coaches that have been around for a long time play into these things. But at the end of the day, you know, one of the things that I talked about last year when we were getting ready to do the season, I had this guy call me up and he goes, you know, hey man, who do you think is the most overrated team in the top 25 to start the season? Immediately, I felt like it was Tennessee. I thought the allegations that were surrounding them, Butch Jones, I thought lost people in that locker room. You know, he started calling other guys traitors to the program. And you start looking at it, and I thought, how long can they really last? Now, of course, I ate crow for about 6 or 7 weeks. But that entire time, Tennessee was living on miracles. They were winning games in last-minute plays. They were winning games in overtime. They had a difficult time playing teams that were nowhere near their level of talent. And I just felt like this was an overrated football team. Ended up being right exactly about my prediction. Finished the regular season 8-4. You know, I just feel like we don't know who really the good teams are. And you're going, well, Andrew, you just said it was 6 or 7 weeks, 8 weeks before, they started really showing their true colors and losing games and running out of miracles. At least by then, I think, though, that when you would have looked and saw the first game that they played, they probably wouldn't have been ranked later on, at least not as high. It would have given somebody else an opportunity to have a high ranking. You take a couple of years ago when North Carolina started out the season with that loss to South Carolina, but then they reel off 11 wins in a row. They never even cracked the top 10. How fair was it to them? Yeah, granted, they ended up losing a really tough game to Clemson. That to this day, that onside kick can definitely be looked at as, what really happened. But at the end of the day, if the rankings didn't come out until week 4, North Carolina peeling off those 3 wins in a row, people may have looked at them differently. Last season, when I think about the top 25 polls and, where teams were and where they started at and how they finished, I don't really buy into a lot of it. Yeah, I really don't. And I understand that if you're an Ohio State fan, for instance, you can look and go, man, we've got a guy like Urban Meyer as our head coach. Every single year, we're expected to compete for a national title, and that's all there is to it. If you're a Penn State fan right now, you're going, hey, man, based off of what we did last year, our returning running back crew, the guys that are coming back to help this football team out, how can you sit back and say we shouldn't be in a preseason top 25? I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. What I'm saying is this: you can't base this year's success off of last year's success and automatically assume that they're going to have a good football team this year. Especially with all the head coaching changes, things that happen. Guys get hurt in preseason. Suspensions happen. Look at Nebraska, what happened with Keyshawn Johnson Jr. Long before the season was even going to begin, he's already out for an entire season of play. Now you're looking at longer time to develop. Now you're looking at you're missing the playing time, the timing, the rhythm that you get down with the guys that are around you. It does play a big part into it. Now you just got to film study and keep yourself in shape in the meantime. But keeping yourself in shape doesn't mean that you're suddenly a talent on the field. You're losing all that valuable playing time. Well, Andrew, guys get redshirted all the time. They do. But when guys are redshirted, they also practice with the football team. I don't think that you should release the polls until week 4. Think about it. During the college football playoff, one of the scenarios that I remember was Boise State becoming from unranked, all of a sudden they're in the number 22, 23 position, and then they tank the rest of the way? Or what about that year that at the time there was, 12, 13 teams in the SEC? 7 of those teams were ranked. By week 4, 4 of them had dropped out of the top 25. Is there really a single conference that is so good that more than half of the teams should start out the season ranked? Come on. And in the NFL, think about this. LaDainian Tomlinson, right? Just got inducted to the Hall of Fame. Does anybody remember when he was in San Diego and Phillip Rivers and all those guys and Gates, and everybody really believed that every single year with that core of guys that they were supposed to be one of the best teams in football, and that every year they should have been competing for a Super Bowl, point blank, an AFC West title, home field advantage. That's the way that it was looked at. I very vividly remember LaDainian Tomlinson getting on TV and going, it's crazy to say this, but we're the best 0-2 team in football. What do power rankings really have to do with anything? We all know the old cliche, games are not won on paper. And things that I get really tired of hearing are these other cliches and these other quips, especially when you think about college football and you think about a team like Ohio State and it's life after Ezekiel Elliott, right? They've got a sophomore running back in Weber. He doesn't have a lot of playing experience. How good is he? What about LSU? Is Darren Juice really the only player that they have on that football team? Is he enough to carry his team through not only the SEC gauntlet, but a team like Syracuse, who, even though they were 4-8 last year, and they're my favorite football team, and I'm saying this, they had votes to get into the top 25 this season. Is it because of Eric Dungy at quarterback? Do people really believe that he's that good? Do they love the system that Babbers is creating up there in Syracuse? I mean, what are the reasons behind the voting? Think about, what was it, last year when Notre Dame played Texas? And they had that phenomenal game, and it went into overtime. And before that, Texas was unranked. And after that football game, they were a top 10 ranked team. How did they finish the season? Well, we know how they finished the season. That's the reason why Tom Herman is there now as the head coach, just to be clear. Or next to either one of those football teams for anybody to watch that game. I think the problem that I see with the top 25 polls in college is this mad dash to make and create a system in where we're just going to constantly try and vote these football teams in that don't necessarily deserve to be there. And what we're doing is we're kind of giving them a head start on getting a better chance to get into a position where they could be in a college football playoff if they're the ones who deserve it, right? Because after all, the backlash still remains from Ohio State, despite the fact that they won the national title that year, going from a 6 to a 3. The backlash still remains from that. So the voters weren't as apt to do it last year for the college football playoff, right? I don't think it should happen until after the 4th week. And I think that the voters should decide on Sunday and Monday when the hooplas calm down, the intensity, the emotions in it. Well, Andrew, these guys are good enough to not put their emotional play into it. Are they? We're all human beings. Rare cases in the NFL where a Houston Oilers or a Denver Broncos or a San Diego Chargers or Carolina Panthers, some of these other teams have started out the season really horrendous, 1-3, 1-4, 2-5, and they've been able to make a run to go to the playoffs. But there's also been the instance where location is everything, and we see a 7-9 Panthers team get into the playoffs. You see, that's the difference. I think in the last couple of seasons, more so than anything in the NFL, it's been a very clear-cut difference between the top-tier team and the lower bottom rung, to an extent. You know, I wrote an article a couple of years ago where I was very confused, and I think that we all were. I mean, there were teams that were 1-5, and then they were 5-5, and then they were 5-8, and then they were 8-8, and it was all across the board. It really didn't seem to matter where you were, and it was really bad in the AFC and the NFC, so nobody knew who was going to get into the playoffs. But I think that we all knew all those teams weren't going to do very well in the playoffs. Because clearly the New England Patriots, the Seattle Seahawks, the Carolina Panthers, the Denver Broncos, during those seasons, they were the clear-cut teams. Hence the Super Bowls and the Super Bowl wins. Especially for New England and Denver and Seattle. Every single year we do this, and I get it. We're all desperate. We just want to talk about football. Me, I want to see a game of football. I want the talk on the field to decide how I feel when I watch a football team. Because I'm not looking at games that are on paper. I'm not looking at Ohio State and going, JT Barrett is a senior quarterback with a senior laden offensive line with junior wide receivers. And then go, well, there's question marks. Another one of those little quips at the running back position. Just not into that. There's question marks at the linebacking spot. I'm not into that. You know what that really means? It means I haven't seen this guy play yet, so I don't know really a whole lot of what he's capable of. And I won't know until a few weeks in when he's played some football teams. And even then, look at the Big 12. Outside of Oklahoma, who really has a difficult schedule in the Big 12? Oklahoma State? Who are they playing? Who's Baylor playing? I mean, come on. And if you have a soft schedule like that, even if you are blowing teams out, I don't necessarily think you should be ranked. And if you are, it should be in the bottom 25. It should not be a number 14 ranking. I think that we're just too quick to decide that this football team is really good. Think about Louisville. All those years that they would blow teams out, they would win games 50-0, and then they would get into the AAC and they would get dominated. Or they would lose 2 or 3 games. At least a team like Notre Dame, when they're in the preseason top 25 polls, they're somewhat justified because every year we know they're going to play USC, Stanford, Michigan, Michigan State. We know that they're going to play at least those 4 or 5 games every single year that you go, these are going to determine how good this football team is. They've got to play all those 8 ACC teams now because of their basketball contract. So now we can at least say, hey, they might play somebody that's a top-tier team like a Miami, a Clemson, somebody like that, that'll really test the waters with both teams. It's just too early to decide. Preseason top 25 polls to me really don't mean anything, and they never will. Preseason power rankings in the NFL don't mean anything to me, and they never will. Not anymore. They kind of used to in the NFL. But the more I'm around this game and the older I get, the more I realize that anything can happen, even in a preseason game. The bottom line is, if we wait 4 weeks, then I think we've at least got a good look at what most football teams look like on a national scale. Because when Texas plays UCLA, or some variation of that matchup, and we go, that was a close game, but how good are those teams really? Well, we'll find out in the next few weeks.
You've been listening to the official Full Court Press podcast, hosted by myself, Drew Duncan. Don't forget, you can always find me on Twitter. That's at DrewDuncan83. Of course, the official Full Court Press podcast is on Facebook. You can also reach me there at DrewDuncan83 as well. For all you Instagrammers, I am on there at DrewDuncan83. Thank you so much for tuning in.